were on 3 different occasions entertained in the Deedat home, and my wife enjoyed the hospitality of Mrs. Deedat as well. I want everyone to understand that I do not come here to engage in some sort of contest to ridicule my friend or make problems for him. I do not come as an enemy, but as a friend, and I value his friendship very highly. Before we begin, and I hesitate to do this, not knowing exactly how my words will be taken, but I feel obliged, both for Ahmad and myself, to make a remark about what happened last Wednesday night to us, he and myself both, here at the Central Mosque in London. I think you were very unkind to my friend because you gave him an assignment he said he had never had opportunity to prepare to do, and when he attempted to speak to the subject and then turned to other matters, somebody sent a note to him while he was still speaking to get back to the subject. I think that was most unkind to treat a guest like that. And I was also a little bit concerned because you asked me to occupy the speaker's table along with Brother Ahmad, but you didn't give me an opportunity either to greet the audience or to speak a word on this subject. And it just so happens that this particular subject that was assigned to Ahmad has been the one to which I have devoted my attention for these last 48 years. Ahmad seemed to have a little difficulty, maybe I misunderstood him, in finding much in the Quran on this subject. But I have found in the Bible, you know, so many things that speak about the relation of God and man. I feel if you had let me have a chance, I could have said something to help my friend out. Please don't do me that way again, and I will appreciate it. The subject, as you have already heard and know, for this assignment to which we are each speaking was Jesus Christ crucified? And in order to answer that question, I think we understand we'll have to ask at least 2 more questions. First of all, what is crucifixion? What does it mean when it says Jesus was crucified? And secondly, what or who is this person called Jesus Christ, of whom we are discussing this evening? The practice of crucifixion is defined in Webster's New World Dictionary as the execution by nailing or binding a person to a cross and then leaving this person to die of exposure. In the case of Jesus, the gospel record is clear. He was not just fastened, he was nailed both through his hands and his feet. The Romans, I'm sure you understand, are the ones who perfected this particular form of execution in order to terrorize the slaves of the Roman world upon whom they depended for all of their works. The Romans had traveled across the world with this terrifying war machine of theirs that trampled over all the nations of the world and reduced most men to slavery. The record indicates that in Jesus' time, 9 out of 10 men in the Roman world were slaves. And the historians in Rome record the fact that Rome lived in daily fear of a slave uprising. With so many slaves, and some of them far more intelligent than their masters and better educated, These people were constantly threatened by the fact that the slaves might revolt. And so they began almost a universal practice of taking slaves and making object lessons of them by crucifying them in prominent places where all could be in fear. In the method of execution by crucifixion, the person is nailed to a bar through the small parts of his recession in the wrist so that the nails would not strip out through the hands. And this bar to which he is nailed is then raised up and dropped onto a post. This post probably already in place, as the Romans practiced execution by crucifixion everywhere. And then the person's feet were pulled up against the wood of the post and one nail driven through the ankles of each foot into the wood. But fixing him in a crouching position where there could be some movement up and down on the cross, and the person would not then immediately die of suffocation. For death on the cross ultimately ended in suffocation when the body weakened by the loss of blood and the excruciating pain and the exposure would get ultimately so weak that the person could no longer force the body up and release the air that was trapped in the lungs and then get another breath of air. In the case of folk like Jesus, where they apparently were interested in hastening the death of the person crucified, the Romans would whip the victim before the time of the crucifixion. And these terrible whips that they used would cut the back and open up the blood vessels in the individual and weaken him and hasten his death. And as you know, Jesus was whipped before he was crucified. Of course, if the Romans at any one time wanted to end the life of a person, it was easily done. Whenever they were prepared for the person to die, they could just go and break his legs, and then he could no longer push himself up and get the air, and in a few moments he would be suffocated to death. In the case of Jesus, it is quite clear that when they crucified him, they flogged him, and then they nailed him to the cross, and then for these 6 hours he was fastened there to the cross by the nails. The second part of the question tonight has to do with, now, who is this Jesus Christ who was crucified? We have already heard that he is one of the prophets and one to be revered. We certainly concur in that statement already made this evening. Let's look, however, in more detail as to what the Bible has to say about this one called Jesus the Christ. The Gospel says that Jesus was born of a virgin, that he was a mighty worker of miracles, that he was a great teacher and prophet. And as you've already heard, and my friend Ahmad had already told me, I understand the Quran does teach you that you are to believe such things about Jesus called the Christ. But there is more in the Scripture about him. Mary